afternoon, commissioners. This is our year-end finance committee briefing. I believe we also have our enterprise departments that will be reporting out as well. So we'll start with general fund, then we'll go to aviation, and then we'll go to we'll kick it over to Abby Patel-Jones, our budget director, to take it from here.
Thank you, City Manager. Before I get started, I want to quickly introduce Roma Yengo. Roma is joining me today, and she will present the revenue slides. She has joined management budget team recently, and so this is her first time presenting the information.
We'll be nice. We'll be nice.
All right, we'll get started. The statement. All right, so this is the general fund statement. The top section of the statement shows our 10 revenue categories, and the bottom section shows the expenditures. Starting with the revenue, overall revenues, as you can see in the top right-hand corner, revenues went up 1.9% or $4.3 million compared to 2024. While it's more of a modest growth than what we saw coming out of the pandemic years, you remember 21, 22, and 24, we saw quite large growth. This is still a positive result, especially given the fact that we are seeing a decline in our largest source, which is income tax, by $6.7 million. Today, we'll walk through several of the highlighted categories, which are more visible in your printed version than on the screen here. Those highlighted categories, we will go more into detail in just a little bit. However, I do want to mention that 8 of the 10 categories have increased year over year in the revenue section. The biggest gains are coming from property and other taxes, EMS fees, fines and forfeits, and other revenues. On the property tax side, I do want to mention that we are seeing that 10.7% increase. That is primarily related to the millage change that took effect in 2025. So you may recall our 10 mil of property tax is into 4.5 mil prior to 2025 went to the general fund, and 5.5 mil went to the bond retirement. Starting in 2025, the split is even, where 5 mil is going towards general fund. And that's why we're seeing that big increase of 10.7% or almost $900,000 year over year. Another category that's worth calling out is the local government fund, which you can see has increased nearly 650% year over year. This is largely due to the fact that we have met prior year obligations that are set forth by the state related to the traffic enforcement camera revenue. The funding has essentially normalized in 2025. So 2025 reflects a full year of regular collections after traffic enforcement camera revenue has been reduced. The $4.3 million growth is largely tied to the photo enforcement revenue, which is essentially recorded twice in the general fund. One is in the fines and forfeits category, and second, it's in the revenue category. If you recall, earlier this year, we did the final transfer of $3.7 million from the photo enforcement fund that came over into the general fund, and that is recorded in the other revenue category. While fines and forfeits category reflects the revenue collected from traffic enforcement, which is now recorded directly into the general fund. We made this accounting shift to offset the reduction in the local government fund. By posting the traffic enforcement camera revenue directly into the general fund, there is essentially no net impact to the general fund. And that's what we were trying to achieve. If we hadn't done that, we would have seen the reduction in the local government fund for the revenue collected from traffic enforcement camera program, but we would not have seen the revenue collected from photo enforcement into the general fund. So this allows us to make that reduction pretty much even. Going to the expenditure side, which is in the bottom section, when we compare the budget, expenditures came in $5.1 million under budget, or about 2.2% lower than the final budget. Departments, I do want to say, did a really good job managing their budget, managing their costs throughout the year. Year over year, personnel cost increased by 4.8% or $7.3 million. And this is mostly due to the wage inflation and more filled positions. But they are still tracking in line with the final budget with a budget variance of 0.5%. Contracts and materials also increased by 4.5% or $2 million. This is mainly due to the NATO-related cost and general inflation. But even with that, we were $4.5 million under budget, or about 8.8% budget variance. So when you put it all together, sources exceeded uses by $4.8 million. This means we didn't have to utilize the use of cash reserve as we had planned, and we maintained flexibility to support future capital needs, equipment, and any other potential economic uncertainty that we may experience going into the next year. For context, I did want to point out that if you back out the photo enforcement transfer, we would have ended the year with $1 million positive. Really, the photo enforcement revenue that was transferred from the old photo enforcement fund is really driving most of that $4.8 million increase. So overall, this year we were steady. We did not see the flashy revenue growth like we saw in 21, 22, and 24, but still it was a good performance for sources over uses. Next slide. Okay, now we'll dive deeper into our largest source, which is income tax. Net collection for income tax in 2025 decreased by $6.7 million or $4.1 million from 2024. However, month-over-month performance remained relatively stable. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the chart of monthly net collection on the right-hand side, that chart shows the revenue each month that we collected in income tax. There are highlighted cells. Those highlighted cells represents a 5 Friday month. And as you can see, in 2024, we had 5 of those 5 Friday months, as opposed to 2025, we had 4. So if you were to back out that 5 Friday month, and then secondly, we also didn't see the large one-time business profits payment that we received in July of 2024. If you back out those two things, essentially income tax revenue is flat. Withholdings, which is the largest category in income tax, increased 0.4% or approximately slightly over $600,000. Withholdings, as you can see in the table, we brought in $142.7 million in 2025. In 2024, it was $142.1 million. So it is in line with 2024 collections. Withholdings saw an increase of 3.5% and 4.2% in the first and third quarter, which was offset by a decline in the second quarter of 4.9%. So when you look at that growth in the first and the third quarter, it is more in line with the wage growth. The decline in the second quarter is largely related to that one less 5 Friday month. As you can see, that occurred in April of 2024. So in the second quarter, there was 5 Friday month in April and in June, while in 2025, we only experienced one, which was in June. Business profits is the second largest category, which declined by 31.2% after seeing an increase of nearly 45% in 2024. As you can see in the chart in the bottom, business profits has experienced the largest volatility over the last few years. It was up over 30% in 21 and 22, and then we saw a decline in 23, and then it was up again almost 45%. But the difference between 24 and 25 is largely the lack of payment that we received, that one large business profits payment that we received in July of 2024. That's why we're seeing that large decline in 2025 of 31.2%. Individual payments are the third category, and the smallest category also saw an increase by 7.2% or $350,700. And lastly, refunds almost increased by 20% or 751,600. Refunds, as you know, contributes negatively to the bottom line. And so the larger the refund, the less revenue we receive. And as you can see in the table, refunds were $4.6 million in 2025 versus $3.9 million in 2024. All right, now we will cover the remaining revenue categories and we'll get into that.
Got him right.
Good afternoon. I'll be going over a couple of the revenue categories, as Abby mentioned. So the first one of note is EMS revenue. EMS revenue increased 9.9% or just over $700,000 in 2025, while billable EMS transports increased 1.5% over the last year. The increase in EMS revenue in part can be attributed to the slight increase in transports, but is also due to increased collections. And then another contributing factor here is that there is a lag in revenue collections as receipts don't directly align with the monthly transports. As a result, the 2025 revenues also reflect the impact of the 2024 rate increase of Medicaid, particularly since about 46% of EMS revenue is generated from Medicaid. Moving on to the next category, which is fines and forfeits. Fines and forfeits revenue increased $4,022,000 from 2024. This increase is, as Abby mentioned, due to the photo revenue being deposited into the general fund instead of the separate special projects fund. Additionally, of note here, parking and traffic fines revenue fell 23.6% in 25, which is driven by a 26.4% decline in parking tickets issued. So there was a decline in parking tickets issued, as well as the share of parking tickets issued that went unpaid increased slightly, 25. The third category is licenses and permits. So licenses and permits revenue increased 19.6% or $713,500. This growth was driven primarily by building and constructions permits revenue, which saw a 33% increase in 2025. So essentially here, changes in permit revenue is largely driven by the changes in the number of permits processed each year. Therefore, this increase in the building and constructions permits revenue is due to an increase in the number of building and construction permits processed in 2025. So similarly, mechanical permit revenue increased 7%, so that's attributed to increased activity in heating and plumbing permits, which is partially offset by decreases in gas and oil and electrical permit activity. And then finally, zoning permit revenue increased 17.1% due to an increase in permits processed in 2025. The last category of revenue that we'll highlight is other revenue. So other revenue increased 18.9% or $2 million in 2025, excluding the transfers in. And accounting for the transfers in, other revenue increased by $753,500. The transfers in, which is primarily photo enforcement revenue, as previously mentioned, decreased from $5 million in 2024 to $3.8 million in 2025. And as Abby mentioned, the final transfer of cash into the general fund from the photo enforcement fund took place in 2025. The increase in other revenue is due to a 205% increase in refunds, which can be attributed to NATO refunds received in 2025. So the city received nearly $2.5 million in NATO reimbursements. Excluding the NATO reimbursements, refunds and recoveries fell about 55% from 2024, but this is due to large reimbursements that we received in 2024 for fires participation in Ohio Task Force 1 for severe weather responses. Cable Franchise fee revenue also decreased 28.9% in 2025. This decline is due in part to the timing of receipts. So in 2023's quarter four payment was processed in quarter one of 2024, increasing 2024's total revenue to include 5 quarters of payments. So in 2025, the quarterly payments have normalized. However, the cable franchise fee revenue has continued to experience a decline of approximately 10% each year since 2021. This is potentially could be attributed to a decrease in cable subscriptions post-COVID. Finally, miscellaneous revenue has increased $6.5 million, 80% since 2021. Most of this growth is coming from these interest earnings, which reside in this category. You can see that chart in the right. The city's interest earnings have increased over $300,000 in the past year and about $6.72 million since 2021. This growth reflects the city's ability to capitalize on higher interest rates over the past several years, as well as changes in the city's investment strategy. So back to you.
I just quickly want to mention about the interest earning, as you saw in the chart. There is almost 1,000% increase if we were to compare to 2021. This is largely a one-time revenue. Once our investments that we have locked in for long term, meaning 3 to 5 years, once they will expire, we will start to see the decline in our interest earning. All right, so going to the expenditures, starting with personnel cost. Total personnel expenditures were $157.4 million in 2025, which is 8.7% or $12.5 million higher than 2024. And as you can see in the chart to the right-hand side, the personnel costs have tremendously gone up over the last few years. We started with $131.3 million in 2021. And then we grew the personnel costs about 3.9% in 2022. Again, personnel costs grew 3.6% in 2023. And as you may recall, in 2024 is when we went into the new contract year, which is why we're seeing that large growth in 2024 of 6.5%. The total cost in 2024 was almost $151 million, and in 2025, we saw again a nearly 5% growth at $157.4 million. In 2024, you may also recall $5.8 million of personnel costs were reimbursed through the state of Ohio's first responder for both police and fire, ARPA grant, and the MRU grant. The 2024 was the year for this ARPA funding to sunset. However, we did receive an extension specifically for the MRU grant, and so we were able to take advantage of that in 2025. As you can see in the table below, for the past few years, those reimbursements were large. In 2025, it was about $600,000. And so it was a good thing because we were able to reduce our costs by $600,000 in 2025. Going into 2026, we will not have any grants that are funding our personnel cost. After excluding the prior year ARPA grant offset, personnel costs grew 4.8% or $7.3 million, and this is largely driven by the wage inflation. Civilian wages, which is the second largest cost in the personnel, were up $3.2 million or 7.6%. Again, it is primarily the reason of wage inflation, year-over-year wage inflation. Sworn wages, which are the largest category in personnel cost, grew 8.8% or $4.2 million. Sworn wages has a combination of the two things. We have higher staffing fire, as well as our annual contract adjustment and staffing increases. Sworn overtime saw 5.7% increase, and as Ruma mentioned, this is primarily related to the NATO-related upstaffing. We also noticed an increase in the holiday pay of 10.9% or $269,300. This is largely due to having one more holiday for the SA pay group in 2025. So 2024's Christmas holiday was paid out in 2025, and that's why we're seeing that increase in 2025. Contracts and materials, total contracts and materials and uses 5% or $2 million compared to 2024. When we exclude other uses, contracts and material increased by 7.6% or $3.2 million. Miscellaneous category experienced the largest increase, as you can see, of 79.4% or $1.4 million. And this is primarily driven by the NATO-related expenditures. 1.2 of the $1.4 million is related to NATO. Taxes also increased by $905,400 or 67.8%. This is largely due to the payment that was made to Miami Conservancy District. This payment is in two parts. One covers the increase that's associated with the existing assessment for the maintenance of the flood protection system. And then the second increase, which is a new increase for the new assessment for capital improvement. And that's why we're seeing this large increase in taxes category. For utilities, we also saw an increase of 5.4% or $224,100. This is related to the payment made to Miami Valley Lighting. This is due to the invoicing delays. As you know, we had some invoicing delays for electricity. And so there were 13 payments made in 2025 for electricity versus 12 payments made in 2024. So this is largely related to that delay that we experienced in 2025. This increase was offset by water utility costs. Overall, contracts and material increases were offset by two things. We did see a decrease in gasoline and diesel fuel cost. This is, as we've seen, costs go down this past year. And so this is related to the economic activities and market condition. And then we also saw a reduction in rental usage compared to the prior year. Right, so looking at the big picture and seeing where we've come in 2025 compared to 2021, income tax has remained the largest source of revenue in 2025, making up 68.2% of the total general fund revenue. Of the remaining categories, 20.6% of the revenue was generated from property and other taxes, waste collection, other charges or services, and other revenue. Overall, revenue increased by 17.9% or $35.3 million since 2021. Income tax rose 8.7% or $12.7 million. And if we were to look at the compounded annual growth in income tax category, it was only about 2.1%, which means on average, income tax only grew 2.1% since 2021 annually. All other revenue categories saw an increase of 44% or $22.6 million since 2021. Excluding interest earnings, growth was 31.4% or $15.9 million. Of that $15.9 million, $9.4 million is coming from fines and forfeits, which contributed $3.9 million. EMS fees grew 56.3% and contributed $2.8 million. And property and other taxes increased almost 41%, contributing $2.7 million. That means the remaining six categories contributed $6.5 million. On the personnel side, personnel costs remain the largest expense, making up 69.2% of the total general fund expenditures. Contracts and materials and were 20.3%, while investments were 10.5% of the total general fund expenditures. Excluding investments, expenditures increased by 22.9% or $38 million since 2021. Personnel cost increased 20.3%, while contracts and material and other uses grew 32.7% from 21 to 25. With the annual wage growth, personnel costs were $26.6 million higher than what we had in 2021. Contracts and material were $11.4 million more than 2021 amounts. As you know, personnel is the largest cost driver, and it continues to be approximately 70% of the total spend in the general fund. Contracts and materials are also growing at a higher pace now that the supply chain delays has normalized from 2020 and 2021. Contracts and material has grown at a faster pace in the last few years than it did in 2020 and 2021. Putting the transfers out, and so on the left-hand side, you can see the various operating transfers, which includes the paramedic training program in the amount of $300,000. We also have set aside for employee professional development of $280,000. $400,000 is for us to cover the 27th pay. As you know, the 27th pay comes around every 11 years or so for each pay group. The set aside allows us to plan in advance so that way we don't have to experience this cost all at once when it does come around. We also have $200,000 transfer for the community paramedicine program. This is a one-time transfer starting in 2026. Community paramedicine program is funded from the general fund. For the CDBG unallowable expenditures, we transfer $193,300. Additionally, we also transfer $73,000 for the violence disruption program. As you know, violence disruption program, the total cost is $473,000. We did transfer $400,000 for this program in 2024. The miscellaneous grant cash matches are nearly $45,000, and then the two small categories of approximately $21,000 and $25,000 are related to capital expenditures. One is in the police department for carpet replacement, and then we also purchased some computers, or we are going to purchase some computers at the recreation center lobbies. So all in all, the operating transfers were $1.5 million. For the investments, we have $11.1 million, nearly $11.1 million for the Your Dollars, Your Neighborhood. This is an increase from our prior allocation. 2025 is the first year of the renewal. There are two things that are going up in Your Dollars, Your Neighborhood. One is the resurfacing. You may recall resurfacing had an allocation of $3.4 million in 2024 and prior, starting in 2025, because we saw almost 60% increase in cost, we had to up the allocation to $5.9 million. And then the second increase is for the newly added housing program of $650,000. Capital improvement, which are listed on the top right-hand corner. The $2.9 million is our normal allocation for 2025. We also fund contingency in case something comes up throughout the year. And so that contingency was $150,000 for capital improvement. The highlighted items are probably familiar to you as they were presented to you during the revised appropriation. We did end up increasing the capital improvement by $1.4 million to stabilize 34 North Main site. And then as for the capital equipment, $2.4 million were set aside for capital equipment. Let me back that up. Capital equipment also has $2.9 million. However, $500,000 is for technology. And so therefore, capital equipment set aside was $2.4 million. And then we have the contingency of $150,000. In the final revised appropriation, we did end up increasing the capital equipment for items that were funded for about $590,000 for police, fire, and planning department. Our development transfer remains the same, $3.2 million, which pretty much covers two things. One is the annual arcade payment, the amount of $1.5 million. And then the second item is the tax sharing payment to Vandalia Butler School District, which is $1.6 million. This tax payment is associated with the jobs that were created at the Dayton airport. And so most of these agreements that are at the Dayton International Airport are either TIP or P1990 CRA, where we are sharing half of our income tax with the school district. For the demolition, we have set aside $1 million, which hasn't changed. It has remained the same for the past, for quite some time now. And so all in all, we have $22.9 million of transfers related to the investments. Here is the department variances, and as you can see, including the encumbrances, the variance overall was 98.6%. Excluding the encumbrances, the variance was 96.3%. And so kudos to the departments for spending the appropriated budget. This variance is in comparison to the final budget. And that is a really good news story. Good job for spending down the allocated funding. All right, so for employment, as you can see in this chart, from the peak in February of 2020 to April 2020, we lost nearly 61,000 jobs, which was 15.5% decline in the job base due to the pandemic. Since then, we have seen some ups and downs, but overall at the end of 2025, we ended the year with 395,500 jobs, which is a growth of 2,900 jobs above the pre-pandemic levels. The data is preliminary, so it is subject to change by the time we see this chart again in the first quarter. Employment in the Dayton region peaked in July, as you can see, July of 2025, and then fell again for the next 5 months, but is still remaining elevated relative to the pre-pandemic levels from 2019. Job count steadily increased from April to July. However, between August and December, employment declined by 3,300 jobs in the Dayton region. But as I mentioned, the counts are still 2,900 higher than where we were pre-pandemic, April of 2020. These are our economic indicators. The Dayton region, starting with the employment chart, the Dayton region was mostly flat, as you saw in the prior chart from February to May, relative to month change. Employment did rebound in the summer months of June and July, and then retreated again by 3,300 jobs by December. The Dayton region is tracking behind the state growth. As you can see, the state registered 1.7% growth compared to the peak of 2020, while Dayton registered 0.7%. For the GDP chart underneath, nationwide GDP declined by 0.6% in the first quarter of 2025. We did talk about this in our third quarter, while growing to 4.4% in the third quarter. The increase reflects higher consumer spending, exports, government spending, and investments. Imports, which are subtracted from the calculation, also decreased. The advanced estimate for the fourth quarter and 2025 year-end will be released on February 20, 2026, but the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta has estimated the GDP for the fourth quarter, and their estimate is around 4.2%. So it is in line with where it was in quarter two and quarter three. Looking at the unemployment chart, where you see Ohio experienced unemployment of 4.5% at the end of 2025, which remained unchanged from December of 2024. It was also 4.5%. The number of unemployed persons in December 2025 was around 265,000, which is consistent with the same level that was reported 12 months prior. Unemployment for Ohio is either in the same range as the surrounding Midwestern states, or better, except for Indiana and Pennsylvania. Then lastly, we have the CPI. Inflation in the Midwest has cooled significantly from the 2022 peak, but remains above historical norms. continuing to put upward pressure on the everyday purchases. The CPI for all items as well as core inflation, including food and energy, rose 2.7% over the year. Food prices increased 2.6% over the year, which includes food away from home, increasing by 4%. Food at home increased about 1.8%, particularly higher prices for meat, poultry, fish, and eggs, rising 4.7% over the year. For the energy prices, electricity and natural gas both increased by 11.4%, while gasoline declined by 6.7% over the last 12 months. So overall, the economy is stable, but it's also sending some mixed signals. Job growth is slower than the state. Unemployment remains steady. GDP has rebounded in these second, third, and potentially fourth quarter. And the inflation has cooled, but is still driving those higher costs that we have experienced over the last few years. All right, diving into the DRP update. We have, as you know, a total of 60 projects in the DRP. The MBE goal for these 60 projects is $22.8 million. And so far we have achieved $22.2 million, which is a great news story because that is a 97.4% compliance rate. This chart shows a detailed breakdown by project subcategory. $102 million. We have approved $89.4 million. And of that, we have spent $65.7 million. And so we have spent 73% of the total award and 64.4% of the total DRP. At the bottom of the page, you see the dashboard link. And that link is available on the city's website. That link provides detail drill down into each of the subcategories as well as each of the projects that are within those subcategories. And since this is a year-end presentation, we also wanted to provide you with some highlights of the projects that have been completed in 2025. We are going to not cover all of them, but we'll cover some of the more really good news story. So starting with the Ronald McDonald House Charities, the total allocation for that project was $645,500. The allocation was spent on design, site preparation, and landscaping. As you know, Ronald McDonald's House serves families with children needing medical services in the Dayton region. Access Center is the second project that had a total allocation of $264,500. This allocation was primarily used to purchase the building, but they also utilized some of the money for the exterior and interior renovations. Access Center provides gently used medical equipment to people in need. The Miami Valley Child Development Center had a total allocation of $300,000. The funding was primarily used for construction and engineering costs for the new building called the Lincoln Hill Miami Development Center. This new location is expected to serve around 200 children. And as you know, NBCDC provides the early Head Start and the Head Start services. And then lastly on this page is the Dayton Children's Hospital, which received $500,000 allocation. This funding supported the Kinship Family Housing Project, which includes the construction of affordable cottage-style homes. On the next page, we'll start with the Good Neighbor House. The Good Neighbor House funding, total funding was $200,000. This funding supported the purchase of Crown Mill and a backup generator for the building. allowing them to provide same-day dental crown services in their clinic, which they provide at low or no cost dental care to the community. They're also safeguarding the food pantry in the event of power outage. The food pantry serves around 160 families and 100 unhoused individuals each day. The next two projects are nearly complete, meaning the projects are complete, but we're still in the final phase of invoicing. So the final invoices haven't been paid to them, which includes the Rebuilding Together. Rebuilding Together received $1.8 million. The funding was used to complete home repairs and modifications in the priority neighborhoods, which include Old North Dayton, Five Oaks, Creek, Edgemont, Carillon, and Miami Chapel. With the ARPA funding, Rebuilding Together was able to assist 139 households, completing 3,570 road repairs. The image that you see here, before and after image, which is the first two images, that is 1008 Grafton Avenue in Five Oaks neighborhood. And then the last project is the Habitat for Humanity, which received $848,000 of total allocation. This funding was used for critical roof repairs to help stabilize and revitalize the Carillon neighborhood, Edgemont, Miami Chapel, Wolf Creek, Five Oaks, Dayton, and Twin Towers neighborhoods. With the funding, Habitat for Humanity was able to complete repairs of 60 addresses. And the image that you see here, which is on the right-hand corner of the roof repair, that is of a location at 1519 Roosevelt Avenue. Right, so we have in totality in progress project. Out of the 60, 45 projects are still in progress, which totals to about $94.5 million. 4 projects have not started, which is $2.4 million, including in these 4 projects are one of the larger one is Longfellow Midtown. It's a $1.5 million allocation. The grantee received notification in December of 2025 that they will be receiving the historic tax credit, which is what we were waiting for. Now that that is in place, P&D will continue to work closely with the grantee and provide regular updates on the progress of this project. The second project is the employee compliance tool. The tool will support the city's efforts to engage diverse businesses and comply with prevailing wage requirements. The project manager is currently working with the vendor and the city department to finalize pricing and requirements. And then the third one is safe and secure housing. As you know, the safe and secure housing process is underway. The portion that has been unspent is for the software procurement, third-party software procurement. The software will provide information for mailing of notices, and it will also keep track of hearing requests. And then the last one is the internal project, which is Pool House at Fairview. The demolition of Pool House is contingent upon the splash pad renovation project, which is currently underway. The design portion of the splash pad project is being finalized, and the construction portion is expected to be put out in quarter. All right, so all in all, for the general fund, income tax collection were lower than 2024 by $6.7 million. If it wasn't for that extra 5 Friday that occurred in 2024, as well as the one large payment, business profits payment that we received in July of 2024, income tax is pretty much flat year over year. Total revenues in 2025 performed $239,400 under the final budget and 1.9% or $4.3 million higher than 2024. And as I mentioned, $3.8 million of this is related to that transfer that we did from the old photo enforcement fund. Personnel costs are 4.8% higher or $7.3 million. This is largely associated with the NATO-related staffing in more positions, as well as the annual wage growth. On the contracts and material and other uses, are up 4.5%, including the $1.5 million in operating transfers. When we isolate contracts and material without transfers, the growth was 7.6% or $3.2 million, largely attributed to the NATO-related expenditures, as well as higher taxes. We also had higher payments for the, which is a normal inflation, and the higher street lighting cost. So at the end of 2025, sources exceeded uses by $4.8 million, which eliminated the need for our planned use of cash reserve. As you know, we had planned to use the cash reserve to balance the budget, but because we ended in the positive, we did not require that. And it also provided us the capacity to address the emergency structural repairs, as you know, at 34 North Main site, as well as increasing the equipment allocation for specifically for police, fire, and planning at the year end. So year-end performance was driven by sustained strong performance related to the interest earnings. As we mentioned, this is truly a one-time source. We're going to experience that for the next few years, but once it dries up, it will be gone. And then the second piece here is the transfer of that one-time transfer of that $3.8 million from the photo enforcement fund into the general fund. Overall, the city's budget performed favorably due to the strong fiscal stewardship across the organization.
Well, thank you. That's good news. And you're right off the bat, the things that you saw off the page is the excellent discipline team, all the departments showed this year. We're still looking for things. So thank you to you. Thank you to all the staff. Really, we're targeting that. Commissioners, any questions or comments with regard to
You, Commissioner Joseph. I just second your comments. No questions other than thank you for the stewardship, and glad to see we're still, performing strong from the budget perspective. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, I'll echo my colleagues' comments. Thank you for the work, and it's remarkable the amount of effort into being good stewards of these resources and getting them in an accountable way. I do have a question, and my question goes back to the broader budget question. And when we did the public hearing on the budget, I was asking, where is the evaluation component of the policy budget? We have the year-end results for the fiscal budget, but from what I can tell, this presentation is divorced from the CSA's 14 outcomes and an overall evaluation of the policy budget. So I'm curious, when do we see that evaluation?
So when we present the information, when we present the annual budget to you in October, that presentation includes the performance from the KPIs for each of the program areas, and it shows the comparison between Q3 and Q3, because that's where we are at that time the year. And then it also shows the overall performance for the entire year, the prior entire year. So we can see how we performed for the entire year, and then where we are today compared to last year when we were.
And we follow up in February for the full quarter.
That's right. Yeah, and then like the city manager mentioned, you will receive the annual report in February, which includes the entire year of performance.
So the metrics are usually identified with some of the intermediary process items, not necessarily the objectives of the CSA, the 14 objectives. And so those metrics really measure process and activity, not necessarily outcomes. And in the policy budget, it calls for whether the budget is being effective and efficient on the outcomes, the broader CSA outcomes.
So the metrics are tied to the programs, each of the program areas, and those program areas then are tied to the community priorities. There are 14 community priorities, and all of those program areas fall within those 14 priorities. And those 14 priorities are then tied to the 5 CSA. And that's how the connection is made to those metrics.
Right, I understand that. But they don't cascade up to a KPI for the 14 objectives. And it seems to me at this point, as we're getting the fiscal budget back, and we have good news here in the fiscal budget, there should also be a parallel process looking at the policy objectives and whether this fiscal budget was achieving the outcomes of the policy budget.
The other thing, for the outcome, we do the annual survey. And so the annual survey does provide us with feedback from the community on how are we doing, against providing those services in the community. And so those metrics are really related to the day-to-day work that we do, but then we go out in the community and we ask them, well, now give us your feedback. How did we do? And that's where the survey results comes in place for the outcome piece.
Right, and that data gets wrapped up into those program metrics at some levels. But again, I think there's a cascading up where there should be an objective at the, or a metric at the objective at the CSA level that then lets us know, have we achieved increasing safety and bringing justice to our neighborhoods, those big objectives that we have. That's my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you. No, I just appreciate the work. I understand your point on that. And I think maybe it would be helpful to kind of try to capture that data at some point. I'm not quite sure where or when that happens, but well, let's want to think about that some more. But other than that, thank you for the work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just two comments. One is my perennial question about gas and diesel fuel costs. I'm really glad to see the decrease. I know that we saw a decrease in cost. Is there any indication that decreased use is happening, like fewer gallons are being burned? You don't have to answer me now. I know. I'm curious to find out. And the second thing is, I noted that we're again spending $1 million in transfer out the investments, $1 million on demolition, which is great. It just reminded me that we've been discussing the last couple of weeks what's going to happen when the federal money for demolition is there anymore. And that's just a reminder to me that I wanted to check in with you all to see if there's a plan for those gaps, to make sure that we have a sustainable amount of funding to make sure that taking down the houses that still need to be taken down after we've taken down the stage.
So, yeah, and we're looking into that with our federal and state lobbyists as well. I mean, you know, we have about $1 million in CDBG that is used primarily for boarding. And there's some demolition. So, you know, that after the federal money that we've identified for this 5-year plan goes away, we're trying to identify other opportunities for other funding sources.
That's all I have. Again, thank you. If there's anything more. All right, well, thank you to your staff. Excellent work this year. Thank you.
We'll have aviation.
Good afternoon, everybody. Field Turner, Director of Aviation, and I have with me Dan Zink. So just want to give you a highlight of 2025. So overall, 2025, we believe was a good year. We started out anticipating and welcoming a first impression of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. So we believe the airport really showed very well. We got a lot of good compliments. We had the escalators working, so we had a lot of good accomplishments that happened in 2025. So we also received over $9 million in grants to replace a lot of our jet bridges, old jet bridges. And also you probably heard in the news the $78 million that we received from all our treaty funds. So that is really all good stuff that's happening. Also the airlines were good to us as well. So United added capacity to Chicago. They added a mainland aircraft to both Chicago and Denver. Delta Airlines added a fifth flight to Atlanta. That's really all it is. We got new service announcement that Allegiant started service to Myrtle Beach come this May. So all good news, good stuff. Joby, they're operational. The old post office, they're actually manufacturing parts for their vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. So it's all good. In spite of all the news that happened with Doge and government shutdown. So, but we still in 2025. Then with some positive news, our employments went up 0.7%. It's good. So we ended about 657,000 employments. Those are people that actually buy a ticket from Dayton. There were total, we have 1.3 million people that actually use the airport. But we count employments, everybody buys the ticket. Commissioner Beck, I know you knew this, so to make sure you understand employment versus deployment. So we total is about 1.3 million people, but you can buy tickets from Dayton, 657,000. It was good. So we were on the rise. So our airline revenues went up about 0.2%, 16,900 compared to 2024. Non-airline revenues increased about 16.5%. Parking revenue increased by 883,000, 10.6%. We did increase the rate. We're still below Columbus and Cincinnati. So they're very competitive parking rates. So, and plus, what else can you park in the garage and walk across to the terminal? So no other airport has a feature. Our rental car concessions, they're up about 1.3 million. That's due to settle-up. I think I mentioned last time that during the pandemic, when the mags went away, we had to do a true setup. So we finally got it all sorted out. So now we're all good with the rental car companies. And we have put something new in place with them. So we're settling up at the middle of the year. Now we settle up every month. That kind of makes it go a little bit better. So there shouldn't be any bags, any large amounts that come in at a later date. Concession revenue, they went up about 160,000 or 14% with increased sales. And very probably good news at the airport that we're getting new concessions. The old Max and Irma's, that's going to go away. That's going to be at Warp Wing. So right now, it's currently closed. They're in the process of remodeling that. So we expect to have that open by June, mid-June. And right now, all the other restaurants are being revamped as well. But we're going to wait until the Max and Irma's and Warp Wing is operational. Then we do it in the Concord. Right now, they're operating and very busy. So it's amazing that we're seeing a lot of traffic into our concession areas. So the total sources are up by 3.2 million or 10% compared to 2024, to about 1.1 million or 3.4% higher than budget. Our total uses have increased by 612,000 or 4.8%, or 752,000, 1.2% under budget. We're still under budget, even though they go up a little bit. Personnel costs are up about 750,000, or 7.2%, but remain about 243,000, 2.1% below budget. Capital projects are down 325,000 or 16.5%. The recovery funds and the bids coming in lower. So we got some low bids. That's for the jet bridges. So it was a real surprise that they came in lower than our estimates. So that was good news for us. Contracts materials, other uses are up by 929,000 or 6.4%. Still below budget. This is give you a snapshot of our operating revenue, which is airline revenues, non-airline revenues. So this is kind of the split that we like to see, roughly about 70% non-airline revenue and about 30% airline revenue. So we're 2872, which is good. Again, airline revenue is up 16,000 or 0.2% year over year, offset by annual settlement terminal rental rates. Non-airline revenue has gone up by 3.2 million or 16.5 compared to 2024. Again, this is all due to the large, in part due to the rental car setup, higher CFC rate. And the CFC, that's a customer's facility charge. That's what's on the like you rent a car every day. There's a fee on there. $6. So we collect $6 per day for the rental car. It was $5.50. We increased it another 50 cents. So that's helping us, and what that does, help me pay for infrastructure improvements. So right now we work on the garage. It's hard to believe it's 50 low, but now it's time to do some maintenance on the garage, do maintenance on the parking lot. So that just helps us pay for those infrastructure costs for the garage. And here's some components of airline revenues: terminal rent space and landing fees. So inside the terminal, we charge airlines for use of jet bridges, the gates, and the baggage claim system, ticket counting, so and all the space that they're in. We're seeing a decrease a little bit because we did lose one of our tenants last year, which was Air Wisconsin. They were operating for American, and they lost that contract. So we lost a little bit, and we also decreased our rental rates. We're really trying to work with them, keep the costs low, so it kind of reflects that a little bit. Landing fees increase. We did get larger aircraft in Dayton, such as to Denver. We saw more capacity into Atlanta, and also we're collecting a little bit more from the general aviation type aircraft, such as the private aircraft. We hired a company called Plane Pass, and they track these airplanes that come in, and they actually build these companies and provide the revenue to the airport, which they take a certain percentage of. The annual settlement was 91,900. So 102. Some various components of non-airline revenue, such as parking, rental car, concessions, and property tax, grounds. Parking revenue, again, like I said, was up 889,000, 10.6%, which was the increase of parking rates. Rental car concession revenue increased by 1.3 million, 2%. Again, it's all settled up, so that should be over now. So you should see that going forward. So all the prior years have been settled up. Concession terminal revenue increased by 160,000 or 14% over 2024, which is staffing, more utilization. So we're offering a lot more again. We have coffee and vending machines and low concourse in the lobby, which we didn't have before. So we're seeing a lot more people taking advantage of our concessions. Property taxes are up over 30,000. And just to let you know, Commissioner Beckham, that we asked this when a tenant taxes, we get reimbursed for that. So it's basically a pass-through cost, but we have to budget for it. And because what's happened down at the South Airport was a huge building that the Connor Group has down where the taxes went up, and we weren't expecting that large increase, so we had to budget for that 430,000 increase. Groundings is up 145,000 or 6% due to new airport tenants such as Joby, Sierra Nevada. So they just completed the fourth hangar, so which is really good. So now there's, I think last year we had only 2, and now we have 4. They're all operational. The fourth one goes online next week. Just passed the final test, so it's all looking good. So let's see. Other non-airline revenues up by 320,000 and 9%. This is because of the interest offset of $1.1 million, which was distributed in December. Personnel costs. Personnel costs are up by 750,000, 7.2% year over year. Wages are up 498,000, 7.5% due to wage inflation and full staff. Fringes is up by 166,000, or 9.9%, consistent with the increase in wages and additional pensions. Overtime is up slightly, about 9,500. Vacancies are filled, we don't need to offer as much. So we'll slide it up a little bit, but not. Police costs are up by 2024, growing 34,800 or 5.1%. Contracts and materials. Total contract material expenses have increased by almost $1 million or 60% compared to Maintenance costs are down a little bit, about 131,000. Market is up to 77,000. But services are down about 580,000. And taxes are up again. We talked about that a little bit, about 466,000. And utilities again up. That's the area of sanitary sewer, water, and gas. 459,000, 18.2%. Other contract material is up by 536,000, 113%. Primarily affecting the concession, the payment funded through the power concession grant. So nothing major, but this is still good. That's the difference. Again, with our employments, this is we're up about 11,000 additional employments compared to 2024. American remains our primary carrier, about 50% of our traffic. Delta and United, we saw growth with Delta, United, and Allegiant. American, that was impacted a little bit because of what government travel, government shutdown. That's why you see the 2% decrease with American Airlines. They're the primary transport a lot of the government employees to places like DCA, Dallas, Fort Worth. So we saw a decrease there, but the other airlines, such as Delta, United, and Allegiant, also increases, which is positive. But we're happy with that. So moving in the right direction. To wrap it up, total sources are up 3.2 million or 10% compared to 2024. Claims have grown 1.7%. Our airline revenue is up 3.8%. Total uses are up 612,000. Expenses are up 780,000. Contract materials, other uses increased 929,000. Total project expenses are down 325,000. Department ended 2025 with an 88,200 surplus. We have a balanced budget. Due to surplus increase. Revenues from the parking session offset slightly with a decrease. Personnel and contract material. We continue to implement cost saving measures where we can, while intentionally growing services to ensure future financial success.
Thank you very much. Good news. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Gil. It was good to recently spend some time at the airport with the team and Deputy City Manager Lofton. Definitely a comprehensive opportunity and learned a lot there. So I appreciate it the time I spent.
Come back anytime you want.
Absolutely. One question, definitely glad to see that employments are slightly up. That's always encouraging. I'm just curious about the parking rate increases. And I guess my question is, are we on some, type of schedule in which we make those rate increases to be more competitive, or is this more so kind of a one-time increase? Just curious if this is something that we tend to come back to, review, and see it increase over time, or again, is this a one-time?
Never one time. We're always looking at, right now, my goal is always to be competitive with Cincinnati and Columbus. Look at their rates and what are rates in the region. So we're one of the lowest airports in the state of Ohio. So our rates are much lower than Cincinnati. Cincinnati raises their rates. I think opportunity for us to increase. Realistic costs go up. Costs to maintain the parking facility and why goes up. So you have to keep up. This is one way to revenue. We are parking one of our largest single revenue. Very important to revenue. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Well, yeah, I was thinking about the parking situation too. Like if there was an opportunity there, just in your opinion, do people evaluate the parking costs when they decide on whether or not they're going to go here or somewhere else?
I don't think so, but I think look at the airlines, but it's a good selling point for the airport. We have reasonable rates. But that's one of the things that I can't control. I can't control the ticket prices, and I can't control parking. That's one of the, what I'm looking at is that it's passenger experience, within the AI control system, but properly, so people have a great experience, and I want them to have a reasonable, pay a reasonable rate. I just went to a race game this summer, paid $3, to park at a race. So to me, I don't think, I don't think that's a deciding factor when people buy it. Like for airport, they're gonna fly on it, but it's a part of the passenger experience.
And remember, Commissioner, we're still dealing with higher rates than Cincinnati flight
Flight rates,
costs, right? And so it's kind of they're balancing a lot right now. If we can get successful in bringing in some low-cost carriers and keep driving those flight costs down, then, I think that there's opportunities then to look at, where we have room to move to, generate more revenue.
Yeah, well, the reason I asked the question, someone asked me recently, what if we just offered free parking? Doesn't feel like that's not an option.
Wrong direction.
I wanted to ask that question for the reason. That was my thought too. And you're right, so I see you sweating over there. But this is definitely, this was enlightening for me because it demonstrates, that parking is a huge economic driver for that. And I guess I'll ask you this question offline. I would be interested in finding out what the break-even point would be for in terms of parking. Right now we're positive, but what would that be? We'll talk
Offline on that one.
That's all I have to think.
Nothing further here either. Thank you very much, Karen.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan.
Or Thursday. No.
Get that thing close.
I'm working on that protection.
You and me both.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Casey Penny. I'm the Director of Water. With me, I have Kenna Chris. I'm sorry, Kenna Meyer. She is she's our Financial Services Division Manager. We're going to talk about the end of year for 2025. For water, it performed as expected on both our revenue, but also on our expenses as well. We'll dive into a little bit of that, some highlights that you can see. There's that line performed as expected. There are some increases there, which will highlight people out. On the sanitary side, we did have some positive conversion. We'll talk about as we go in. But again, we performed as expected. Changes. I'm overly excited about, other than the fact that we're in December, which is what we can see. Next slide.
So good afternoon. I'm going to go over our sources and uses statement, which is essentially a summary of our expenses and revenues for 2024 and 2025. And then our director will dive into some or any changes. So in our sources and uses statement, we always start at the top with our sources, in other words, revenues. Overall, in the water fund, up $5.8 million or 8.5% when we compare 25 to 24. This was really driven by our three largest revenue categories. The first and largest being revenues from city customers. We were very close to our budget forecast, only around $240,000 above budget forecast. When we look at year over year, a 7.5% increase of $2.4 million from our city customers. That's very closely in line with our rate increases for 2025. Our second largest revenue category is revenues from other jurisdictions. So think Montgomery County, Trotwood. up considerably over budget forecast, and that was really due to some favorable bill timing, but also higher revenue in certain county accounts with the moment. Looking at year over year, an 8.3% increase of 2.2 million. This is right in line with the rate increases, with the exception of those sort of favorable bill timing instances. The third revenue gain was in interest revenue, and so we experienced a significant year-over-year growth of 1.5 million, and budget director spoke to that, but that was due to higher than average yields in investment portfolios post-pandemic, and a few times where higher interest actually is positive. Looking at the bottom half of the table, those are our uses, so money out, our expenditures. That was up really only 3.6% or 2.3 million. And so we had some increased categories, very similar to the general fund. Personnel costs up 6.3%, contracts and materials, which we expected considering inflation. That was due largely to sludge disposal costs, but we are also at the end of our life in our meters in Brooklyn and Trotwood. So we've been working very closely with our colleagues in finance to make sure that all of those customer service concerns are being addressed. And so we've got crews out replacing aging, dying meters. And so we hope to is really a driver in that category. And then we also had some well-field improvements at water supply and treatment. Really, the reason that we didn't see what we expected in our overall uses due to inflation was because we had a really strong offset in our capital equipment. And so we kind of talked the flip of this time last year. We were so impacted by the supply chain issues in this category. So we were struggling to get all of the equipment that we had been ordering in 21, 22, even into 23. Our colleagues in procurement and budget helped us re-budget, re-procure when some of those purchase orders lapsed. We were finally able to fulfill a lot of that in 24. So that category almost doubled in a way. And so now this is not that we're not purchasing the equipment that we need, we're just back to business. And like we always like to see, we did not have to use our half reverse in the water fund in 2025. Turn it back to our director to go over some of those details.
So if we look at our budget, again, we did perform as expected. We were up when we looked at the city of Dayton rates. We didn't fully realize our 9% rate increase, but we did hit about 7.5%, which is what we expected. We do have a little bit of bill timing, so we expect as we go to the next quarter, to see an increase there. But this is just due to we're able to. But our usage is still as we expected, so that is relative. When you look at other jurisdictions, again, there you're going to see that we're pretty much performing as expected. We're not quite meeting the rate increase that we were expecting from there, but we do have some volumetric increases. So there is other uses that are increasing, but you also have to get some as Kenna pointed out earlier, you can see that we had an increase of 1.5% in the interest rate. So again, we are happy to see that. But then we also have that revenue increase from line sales, which we keep seeing year over year. So this is more due to the fact that we have 13% increase that's tied to the index. But we also had a few extra additional line sales as well. But this is mainly encompassing the all increase levels. So as we go over to our expenditures on the water side, we did have some increases in our personnel, which is about $1.7 million. This is due to our regular merit increase, but also you're going to see some increases in our overtime. We are continuing to fill some positions, so we're hoping that overtime will start to decrease. Or if we do continue to see overtime, it's because we're doing projects in-house. It's not just covering this 20. We have the offset that we talked about by Owen earlier that you see on the board continuing to see the trends with the personnel. As you go down to our capital equipment here, we just talked about before. So as you had the supply chain issues from COVID, where you would order things, And that's continued on. You can see that we're starting to that supply chain issue, and we're starting to see that when we're ordering and budgeting, it's starting to come here that we actually did. So it's not that we're changing our budgeting, it's just as items are starting. If you look over at contracts and materials, we do have where we're up there, and this is due partially if we start with looking at residual or sludge, which is tied to our in our how we're putting there. If you have increased line residual removal, you're going to have the sludge is going to go up, and we're also going to have continued production at the line. But also, if you have a wetter season, is where it takes longer for us to get those processes out. So that changes the process. And then you're also just going to have the CPI increase. So that's why you're seeing those increases with our capital, with our sludges. If you go down to supplies and materials as a whole, those are increased, but those are due to us actually starting to complete projects. So you have some improvements out in the well field, which are some pumps that are being replaced, but also we're starting to do improvements with our skater fund, which is where we're starting to increase some of the instrumentation that's removed, which is also starting to harden our improve our cybersecurity as you go through and you start to do those improvements. So that's why you're starting to see some of those increases in our supplies. As you look at professional services, those are up as well, but that is as we're going through investments on those larger pumps that you have in our distribution system. So auto and those two main pump systems. And then for utilities, these are up. They're not as up as we would like for them to be because we still feel a slight delay in the AES and IGS billing, but we're hoping when we get to next quarter of 2025, that first quarter, we'll be able to tell you that we found out for what we expected. And you'll see the same thing. So.
Okay. And moving on to our sanitary fund in our sources and uses statement, starting first with our sources for revenue. Overall, 9% or 4.2 million when we compare 25 to 24. Again, our two driving revenue categories are from city customers and other jurisdictions. Starting first with city customers, our largest revenue category. Almost 10% above forecast. When we look year over year, a 4.3% revenue increase of a little under $1 million. That's very closely in line with our rate increases in the sanitary fund. Sanitary utilities, sorry. Revenues from other jurisdictions. This follows a similar pattern as we saw on the water side. Considerably above budget forecast, year over year, a 10.9% increase of $1.8 million, in part because of rate increases, but largely due to favorable bill timing and also increased consumption in certain county accounts. Our other revenue was up almost $509,000 when we compare to 2024, and that's largely attributable to the revenues that we've started to realize from the R&D project out of reclamation. Director will get into that in a moment. Other charges for services up $400 and almost $26,000, and that's due to higher BOD demand from our large industrial users. Looking at our expenses or uses, down 1.2% or a little under 500,000 due to, just like we talked about before, that offset of capital equipment, as well as lower personnel and contracts and materials costs. And as we always like to see, cash reserves were not required in Q4 2025. I do want to sort of highlight, and our directors spoke to this a little bit ago, for utilities, we had a short amount of time towards the end of the year to push out as many IGS payments as we could. We focused first on our water fund because those are the bills. So we're getting caught up with sanitary, and we'll see that first quarter of this year.
So when we go through here to our actual revenue again, we were up as expected, which is good. We didn't fully hit the increases that we saw of the 5.5%. However, we know this is due to bill timing, and hopefully we'll see these revenues in the next quarter of 2025. When we look at bill timing, and you're gonna see that both on water, you're gonna see this on the city side, but also on other jurisdictions as well. But we would like to note that on other jurisdictions, there are some increases in usage as well. When we look at our other revenue sources, we'd like to talk about the RNG project, including great collaboration with our sustainability office. Although this is starting to show that it has profitability, we want to make sure we caution that this is a very volatile market. So although we are seeing profit now, it is being offset by the use of what we're purchasing for natural gas. So we haven't had a full year, so we can't say if this is the trend we'll see, but we want to highlight this as something from or 2025 into 2026. And then again, we have our other charges as well, when we're looking at our BOD and our suspended solids. The BODs were higher, but this was offset by suspended solids. This is great for our actual operations, but for our bottom line, there's a bit of a caution as to increasing. As we go over to our expenditure side, again, we're seeing that our personnel is actually lower for our sanitary side, which is good, and we continue to fill into our vacancies. But we are going to have some higher overtime usage because we still have to train the people as they come into the 24-hour operation. So we're hoping that that overtime number starts to either decrease, or if we're talking about it, it's because we're doing projects in-house. Similar on the water side, you're going to have on the sanitary side that we're starting to see a slowdown in our equipment as 2023, we got equipment in, 2024 equipment came in, and then 2025. So we're hoping that this continues the trend, and when we budget it is when we actually get our capital equipment. As you go over to contracts and materials, those were lower, but a part of this is when you look at professional services, you had a decrease in some of the bill timing there. Supplies and materials were down again, but a part of this is because our staff was able to optimize some of their chemical use. So that's a good thing that is down. In utilities, as we said, we're trying to catch up on actually paying those bills as we're starting to get the bills paid. But this was offset by our sludge removal, which is similar to residuals on the water side. So we had a very wet year last year. As you remember, we had 2 weeks of just continuous rain. When that happens, we have to actually send those residuals to a dump, and then we have tipping fees, which makes the cost higher. And then you're also just going to have regular CPI increases as well. And then you also had another offset on some security enhancements. Again, we try to make sure that we're securing our facilities because this is a part of our operation requirements. So as we end up 2025, on both the water and the sewer side, they performed as expected. We did have increased revenue, with natural gas, but also our revenue sales were up as well. Personnel costs on the water side were up, but we are continuing to fill positions. On the sanitary side, they were lower, but again, we're hoping that this is a continuation as the overtime numbers start to working out. Contract materials were up, and we continue to make our strides towards doing projects. And a lot of this is related to some of our residual removals, our sludge removals, depending on which side of the drain we're on. But those continue to make sure that we are able to fulfill our operational needs. As also explained, we did not use our cash reserves, which again is showing that we are meeting our budgetary needs. And that is water for 2025.
Thank you. Excellent. Commissioners, any questions or comments?
No questions, just some brief comments. Also want to thank the water department for recently hosting me, and Deputy City Manager. I just have a few quick things I want to just lift up. Really cool to see the profitability of the renewable gas project. I remember it's approved, so it's really cool to see it actually saving the city money. I'd be very interested to, just continue to see the long-term profitability of it moving forward. And just want to say, great to see the higher revenues in 2025. So thank you.
Mr. Pritchard.
I'm good.
I just want to echo my colleagues' comments. Very excited about natural gas. And actually, I'm curious if anyone else has started to ask about it, who fielded any calls from anyone trying to imitate us. I wonder who would put it in if we would actually hear.
Not right now, but hopefully we will soon.
That'll be interesting. All right. Well, thank you. If there's no other questions or comments, back to you, City Manager, if there's anything else.
I don't believe we have anything else. Yes, sir.
Just wanted to let you know, Commissioner, we did get word that we diverted 776. Oh, seven, well, 7,700. I said, well, yeah, 7,776 due to our electric.
Really good. Thank you. That's excellent. Also, good work. And thank you all out there.